The gangster realized that the right hand was selling his secrets, but those secrets were lies. The November rain drummed against the frosted windows of the Crimson Rose speakeasy, casting dancing shadows across the mahogany bar where Vincent "Vinny" Torino sat nursing his third whiskey of the evening. Chicago's South Side had grown colder with each passing year since the war ended, and tonight felt particularly bitter. The jazz quartet in the corner played a melancholy tune that seemed to echo the weight pressing down on his broad shoulders. Vinny's weathered hands, scarred from too many fights and too many years, trembled slightly as he lifted the glass. At 52, he commanded respect from every corner of the city's underworld. His organization controlled the liquor trade from the docks to the wealthy neighborhoods up north, and his word was law in a dozen neighborhoods. But tonight, something gnawed at him, a suspicion that had been growing like a cancer in his gut. "Boss, you wanted to see me." The voice belonged to Tommy Marcelli, his right-hand man for the past 8 years. Tommy slipped into the booth across from him, his sharp blue eyes scanning the nearly empty establishment with practiced caution. His black hair was slicked back in the fashionable style, and his expensive suit spoke of their recent successes in the bootlegging business. Vinny studied Tommy's face in the amber light of the overhead lamp. This young man had saved his life twice, had helped build their empire from nothing more than a handful of loyal soldiers and a single truck. Tommy's loyalty had never been questioned, until 3 weeks ago, when whispers started reaching Vinny's ears. "You can tell me about the Murphy deal," Vinny said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Tommy's expression didn't change, but Vinny caught the microscopic tightening around his eyes. "What about it?" Everything went smooth as silk. "We moved 200 cases through their territory, paid the agreed tribute, and everyone walked away happy. Everyone except Sean Murphy himself, who's been telling people that we're planning to muscle in on his territory come spring." Vinny leaned forward, his gray eyes boring into Tommy's. "Funny thing is, Tommy, the only person I told about those plans was you." The jazz music seemed to fade into the background as tension filled the space between them. Tommy's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his jacket, then stopped. He was smart enough to know that 3 of Vinny's most trusted men were positioned around the room, and any sudden movement would be his last. "Boss, you know I'd never—" "I know what I know," Vinny interrupted, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The question is, what am I going to do about it?" Outside, the city hummed with its usual nighttime energy. Automobiles splashed through puddles on the cobblestone streets, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The elevated train rattled past in the distance, carrying late-shift workers and night owls back to their homes in the suburbs. Chicago never truly slept, especially not in the neighborhoods where Vinny held sway. Tommy straightened in his seat, and for a moment, Vinny saw a flash of something in his expression. Not guilt, but something else entirely. Pride, perhaps, or satisfaction. "Vinny," Tommy said, using his first name for the first time in years, "there's something you need to understand about loyalty. It ain't just about following orders or keeping your mouth shut. Sometimes, real loyalty means making the hard choices that the boss can't make himself." The words hung in the air like smoke from a recently fired gun. Vinny felt the familiar weight of the .38 Special beneath his jacket, but something in Tommy's tone made him pause. There was no fear in the younger man's voice, no desperate pleading of innocence. Instead, there was a calm certainty that sent a chill down Vinny's spine. "Keep talking," Vinny said. Tommy glanced around the room, ensuring they wouldn't be overheard, then leaned across the table. "Yuri, what if I told you that every piece of information I've been feeding to our competitors has been carefully crafted? What if those secrets about our spring expansion, our new smuggling routes, our plans to move into Murphy's territory, what if none of it was true?" Vinny's mind raced, trying to process the implications. "You're telling me you've been lying to everyone, including me?" "Not lying to you, boss. Protecting you. See, I figured out months ago that we had a real rat in our organization. Someone high up, someone with access to genuine intelligence. So I started spreading false information, different lies to different people, waiting to see which ones would surface. The revelation hit Vinny like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on suspecting Tommy that he'd missed the larger picture. And Tommy's smile was cold as the November wind outside. "You mean tomorrow morning, when the feds raid Murphy's warehouse, the one they think we told them about, we'll know exactly who's been selling us out. Because the only person I told about Murphy's secret warehouse was Councilman Bradley, and I made sure he knew it came directly from you." The pieces began falling into place in Vinny's mind. Bradley had been pushing for more meetings lately, asking probing questions about their operations, claiming he needed details to keep the heat off them with city officials. Vinny had trusted the man because he'd been useful for years, smoothing over problems with permits and keeping certain investigations from gaining momentum. "You set him up," Vinny said, not quite a question. "I set them all up, boss. Bradley, Murphy, even some of our own crew who I suspected might be playing both sides. Tomorrow morning, we'll see who scrambles to warn whom, who suddenly disappears, and who looks surprised when the raids happen." Vinny poured himself another whiskey, his hand now steady as rock. The weight on his shoulders was shifting, transforming from suspicion and betrayal into something else entirely, a dangerous kind of hope mixed with admiration for the young man across from him. "And if you're wrong about Bradley," Tommy's eyes glittered in the lamplight, "then we'll know it's someone else, and we'll keep playing the game until we flush them out. But I'm not wrong, Vinny. I've been watching, listening, putting pieces together. Bradley's been feeding information to Detective Morrison, and Morrison's been building a case against us for months." The speakeasy's atmosphere felt different now, charged with possibility rather than dread. Vinny realized that Tommy hadn't just been protecting the organization, he'd been running his own counterintelligence operation, using deception as a weapon against their enemies. "You should have told me," Vinny said, though his tone carried more curiosity than reproach. "With respect, boss, you're a lot of things, but you're not a good liar. If you'd known the truth, Bradley would have seen it in your face the first time he asked you a direct question. This way, your reactions were genuine because you believed what I was telling you." As the implications sank in, Vinny felt something he hadn't experienced in months, genuine pride in his protege. Tommy hadn't just shown loyalty, he'd shown the kind of strategic thinking that could keep them all alive and free in an increasingly dangerous world. The rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, but somehow the night felt less cold than it had an hour ago. Dawn broke gray and unforgiving over Chicago's south side, painting the brick buildings in shades of ash and shadow. Vinny stood at the window of his office above the butcher shop that served as his legitimate front, watching the street below come alive with the morning's first stirrings. Milk wagons rattled over cobblestones, early risers hurried toward the elevated train station, and somewhere in the distance, church bells called the faithful to morning mass. His telephone had been ringing since 5:30. The first call came from Mickey Torino, his cousin who ran numbers on the west side. Mickey's voice had been tight with worry as he reported unusual police activity near the docks. Unmarked cars, too many uniforms, the kind of coordinated movement that meant federal agents were preparing for something big. The second call came from Sophia DeLuca, who managed their most profitable speakeasy in Little Italy. Her girls had overheard conversations between two men in expensive suits who'd been asking too many questions about shipping schedules and warehouse locations. They'd paid their tab with crisp new bills and left without touching their drinks. Tommy arrived at 7 sharp, as he had every morning for the past 8 years. But today, Vinny studied his right-hand man with new eyes, seeing not just the loyal soldier he'd always known, but the chess master who'd been playing a game several moves ahead of everyone else. "Any word from your sources?" Vinny asked, settling behind his desk with a cup of strong coffee. Tommy pulled out a leather-bound notebook, flipping through pages covered in his precise handwriting. "Morrison's been busy. 3 different raids planned for this morning, all based on the information I fed through Bradley, Murphy's warehouse, the Kelly's distillery operation, and that new speakeasy on Halstead Street that everyone thinks is ours. But isn't ours," Vinny confirmed. "Never was. I made sure Bradley believed we'd muscled in on O'Malley's territory and were using that place as a front. O'Malley's going to be very surprised when the feds kick down his door looking for our operation." Vinny couldn't help but smile. O'Malley had been undercutting their prices for months, spreading rumors that Vinny's organization was getting soft, that the old man was losing his edge. The Irish gang leader would spend the morning explaining to federal agents why his establishment was suspected of being connected to Vinny Torino's bootlegging empire. "What about Bradley?" Tommy checked his watch. "He should be making his move right about now. I arranged for him to receive word through one of his usual channels that we discovered the leak and are planning to eliminate it tonight. If he's dirty, he'll run. If he's clean, he'll call a meeting to discuss security," Vinny finished. "Smart. Either way, we'll know." The morning progressed with agonizing slowness. Reports trickled in from their network of informants throughout the city. At 8:15, federal agents raided Murphy's warehouse, finding nothing but legitimate cargo and very confused dock workers. At 8:30, they hit the Kelly's distillery, discovering that the family had been out of the bootlegging business for 6 months and was now manufacturing legitimate industrial alcohol. By 9 o'clock, Tommy's telephone contacts confirmed that Detective Morrison was furious. 3 major raids based on supposedly solid intelligence had yielded nothing but embarrassment and questions about his sources. "Bradley should be calling any minute now," Tommy said, settling into the chair across from Vinny's desk. As if summoned by his words, the telephone rang. Vinny gestured for Tommy to answer, wanting to observe his protégé's performance. "The Torino's Meat Company," Tommy said in his professional voice. He listened for a moment, then handed the receiver to Vinny. "Councilman Bradley." Vinny took the phone, keeping his expression neutral. "Councilman, what can I do for you?" Bradley's voice carried the familiar mixture of authority and barely concealed nervousness that had characterized their relationship for years. "Vincent, we need to meet. This morning, there are developments that require immediate attention." "What kind of developments?" "Not over the telephone. Can you be at the usual place in an hour?" The usual place was a small office above Bradley's legitimate law practice, where they'd conducted business for years. Vinny had always assumed it was secure, but now he wondered how many of their conversations had been recorded or reported. "I'll be there," Vinny said, then hung up. Tommy was already reaching for his coat. "Want me to bring the boys?" "No, if we're right about Bradley, spooking him won't help us learn the full extent of the problem. If we're wrong," Vinny shrugged, "one crooked politician isn't worth starting a war over." They walked through the morning streets, past shop owners sweeping their storefronts and children hurrying to school with books clutched under their arms. The city felt different to Vinny now, less like a place where enemies lurked behind every corner, and more like a chessboard where every move could be calculated and countered. Bradley's office occupied the second floor of a narrow building wedged between a haberdashery and a bakery. The lawyer had built his practice representing working-class families, but everyone in the neighborhood knew his real income came from smoother sources. His secretary, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Patterson, waved them toward the inner office without looking up from her typewriter. Councilman Robert Bradley was a thin man in his late 40s, with prematurely gray hair and the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time indoors. Today, however, his usual composure seemed strained. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air, and his hands trembled slightly as he poured coffee from a silver service set. "You, Vincent? I'm afraid we have a serious problem," Bradley began without preamble. "Detective Morrison contacted me this morning. He's convinced that your organization has a leak, someone feeding information to federal agents." Vinny accepted the coffee cup, noting how Bradley's eyes wouldn't meet his directly. "What makes Morrison think that?" 3 raids this morning, all based on intelligence about your operations. All of them came up empty. Morrison thinks someone is feeding him false information deliberately, trying to make him look incompetent. Tommy had been silent until now, but Vinny noticed the subtle shift in his posture, the way his hand drifted closer to his jacket, not preparing for violence, but ready for it if necessary. "Interesting theory," Vinny said. "And what does Morrison plan to do about it?" Bradley finally looked directly at him, and Vinny saw something he'd never noticed before, a calculating coldness behind the nervous exterior. "He wants to meet with you directly, tonight. He says he has information about the leak that could be valuable to both of you." The words hung in the air like smoke, carrying implications that Vinny was only beginning to grasp. Morrison wanted a direct meeting, which meant he was either desperate enough to break protocol or confident enough in his position to make demands. Either way, it suggested that the detective's relationship with Bradley was deeper than simple corruption. "Where does he want to meet?" "The old Riverside warehouse, Pier 19, midnight." Bradley reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. "He asked me to give you this." Vinny took the envelope but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he studied Bradley's face, looking for tells, signs of deception or fear. What he saw was more troubling than either. He saw relief, as if Bradley was glad to finally be playing his cards openly. "Robert," Vinny said quietly, "how long have you been working for Morrison?" The question seemed to hit Bradley like a physical blow. His coffee cup rattled against its saucer as he set it down, and for a moment, his careful politician's mask slipped entirely. "Vincent, I don't know what you mean." "Since the beginning," Tommy interrupted, his voice carrying a certainty that made both older men turn to look at him. "Morrison didn't approach you after you started taking our money. You were working for him before we ever met. Weren't you, Councilman?" Bradley's silence was answer enough. Vinny felt the pieces of an enormous puzzle clicking into place in his mind. The helpful lawyer, who'd appeared just when they needed political protection, the convenient connections, the inside information about police operations, all of it had been orchestrated from the start. "How much of it was real?" Vinny asked. "The protection I provided was real," Bradley said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The warnings about raids, the permit problems I smoothed over, the heat I kept off your operations, all of that was genuine. But you were reporting everything to Morrison. I was supposed to be. But Vincent, you have to understand. I never gave him anything that would truly hurt you. Names of small-time operators, information about competitors, details about shipments that were already completed. I kept the real intelligence to myself." Tommy laughed, a sound without humor. "You kept it to yourself, or you fed it to someone else?" Bradley's face went white. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting sharp shadows through the office windows. Outside, the city continued its daily rhythm, unaware that in a small office above a law practice, the foundations of several criminal empires were shifting like tectonic plates. Vinny opened the envelope Bradley had given him. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with a message written in Detective Morrison's careful script. "Mr. Torino, the game has become more complex than either of us anticipated. Tonight's meeting will clarify several matters that have been causing confusion. Come alone, and we can discuss the future of your operations in Chicago. Failure to appear will be interpreted as a declaration of war." "Detective James Morrison." "Tommy," Vinny said quietly, "I think we're going to need those boys after all." The Riverside Warehouse District at night was a maze of shadows and fog rolling off Lake Michigan, where legitimate commerce gave way to the darker enterprises that kept Chicago's underground economy thriving. Pier 19 sat at the edge of this industrial labyrinth, its weathered loading dock extending into black water that reflected the distant lights of the city like fallen stars. Vinny arrived at 11:30, but he wasn't alone despite Morrison's instructions. Tommy crouched in the rafters of the adjacent warehouse, a Springfield rifle trained on the main entrance. Mickey Torino and two other trusted men were positioned in a delivery truck parked between stacks of shipping containers, ready to move at the first sign of trouble. They'd learned long ago that Chicago police detectives who arranged midnight meetings rarely had conversation in mind. The warehouse itself was a monument to the city's industrial might. 3 stories of steel and brick that had seen decades of legitimate cargo pass through its doors. Tonight, it felt like a tomb. Vinny's footsteps echoed off the concrete floor as he made his way through the maze of crates and machinery toward the office area in the building's center. Detective James Morrison was waiting for him, but he wasn't alone either. 2 men in expensive suits flanked him, their hands resting casually on their jacket fronts in a way that spoke of concealed weapons and professional experience. Morrison himself was younger than Vinny had expected, perhaps 40, with the lean build of a former athlete and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Torino," Morrison said, his voice carrying the flat accent of Chicago's South Side. "Thank you for coming." "Detective," Vinny replied, keeping his hands visible and his tone neutral. "You said you had information about a leak in my organization." Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I did say that, didn't I? The truth is more complicated than a simple leak. Vincent. May I call you Vincent? You can call me whatever you like, as long as you get to the point." "The point," Morrison said, beginning to pace in the small circle of light cast by an overhead lamp, "is that your right-hand man has been playing a very sophisticated game. Tommy Marcelli has been feeding information to multiple parties, creating a web of deception so complex that, Even I'm not sure I understand all of its implications. Vinny felt his stomach tighten, but kept his expression neutral. What kind of information? False information, primarily. Details about operations that don't exist. Plans for expansion into territories you have no intention of entering. Shipping schedules for cargo that never arrives. Tommy's been running what intelligence services call a disinformation campaign. One of Morrison's companions stepped forward, and Vinny recognized him as Councilman Bradley. The lawyer looked haggard, his usual composure completely shattered. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "Vincent," Bradley said, his voice hoarse, "I tried to warn you through proper channels, but Morrison convinced me that a direct meeting was the only way to resolve this situation." "What situation would that be?" The third man spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the crisp precision of someone accustomed to authority. "It is the situation where your organization has been unknowingly protecting federal interests, while simultaneously undermining our ability to prosecute your competitors." Vinny studied the stranger, noting the quality of his suit, the confidence in his posture, the way Morrison and Bradley deferred to him despite his younger age. "And you are?" "Special Agent William Hayes, Bureau of Investigation. I've been coordinating efforts to map Chicago's bootlegging networks for the past 2 years." The revelation hit Vinny like cold water. Not only had Tommy been running a disinformation campaign, but he'd been doing it under the supervision of federal agents. The implications were staggering. "You're telling me that Tommy has been working for you?" "Not directly," Hayes said. "Mr. Marcelli approached us 6 months ago with a proposition. He'd observed that your organization was being systematically targeted by competitors who seemed to have inside information about your operations. His investigation led him to suspect Councilman Bradley, but he needed a way to confirm his suspicions without alerting the real leak." Morrison picked up the narrative. "Tommy proposed a controlled disinformation campaign. He would feed false intelligence through Bradley, and we would act on it in ways that wouldn't actually damage your operations, but would allow us to identify the information's ultimate destination." Vinny's mind raced as he processed this new information. "So the raids this morning were designed to fail," Bradley said miserably. "Tommy made sure that we were targeting locations that either belonged to your competitors or had no connection to bootlegging at all. But why involve federal agents?" Hayes smiled grimly. "Because, Mr. Torino, your organization isn't the only one with internal security problems. Detective Morrison discovered that several members of his own department were taking money from your competitors while feeding information to federal agents. Tommy's disinformation campaign was as much about exposing corruption in the police department as it was about protecting your operations." The warehouse around them seemed to press closer, as Vinny absorbed the full scope of what Tommy had orchestrated. His protege hadn't just been protecting the organization. He'd been running a counterintelligence operation that involved multiple law enforcement agencies and rival criminal groups. "Where is Tommy now?" Vinny asked. "That," Morrison said, "is an excellent question. He was supposed to be here tonight to explain the full extent of his network and identify the remaining security threats. When he didn't show up, we became concerned." A new voice cut through the warehouse air, carrying the familiar Brooklyn accent that Vinny had heard almost daily for 8 years. "I'm right here, gentlemen. Sorry to keep you waiting." Tommy emerged from the shadows beyond the light, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. His suit jacket was torn, his face bore the marks of recent violence, and his left hand was wrapped in a makeshift bandage. "Jesus, Tommy," Vinny said, instinctively moving toward his protege. "What happened?" "I found our real leak," Tommy replied, his voice tight with pain and exhaustion. "Turns out Bradley wasn't the only one with divided loyalties." Hayes stepped forward, his hand moving toward his jacket. "Mr. Marcelli, you're injured. Do you need medical attention?" Tommy waved off the concern. "I'll live, but I'm afraid our friend Detective Morrison here has some explaining to do." The detective's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about your midnight meetings with Patrick Sullivan. I'm talking about the envelope of cash I saw you accept from one of Sullivan's men 3 days ago. I'm talking about the fact that while you've been helping us expose Bradley's connections to federal agents, you've been feeding real intelligence about our operations to the Irish gangs on the north side." The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant sound of water lapping against the pier. Morrison's two companions had turned to look at him, and Vinny could see the moment when Hayes realized that his carefully orchestrated operation had been compromised from the beginning. "Detective Morrison," Hayes said quietly, "is this true?" Morrison's hand moved toward his service weapon, but Tommy was faster. Despite his injuries, the younger man's pistol appeared in his hand with fluid precision, trained on Morrison's chest. "I wouldn't," Tommy advised. "Vincent, you might want to know that Detective Morrison has been planning to arrest you tonight on federal charges. The meeting was a setup designed to get you away from your usual security." Vinny felt the familiar weight of his own weapon beneath his jacket, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he studied the faces around him, reading the fear in Bradley's eyes, the calculation in Hayes's expression, the desperate cornered animal look that had appeared on Morrison's face. "Uni Agent Hayes," Vinny said conversationally, "it seems like your operation has gotten a bit more complicated than you anticipated." Hayes nodded grimly. "It would appear so. Detective Morrison, I'm placing you under federal arrest for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. You'll surrender your weapon immediately." Morrison's laugh was harsh and bitter. "You think it's that simple? You think I'm the only one who's been playing multiple sides in this game?" He looked directly at Tommy, and Vinny saw something pass between them. A recognition, perhaps, or an acknowledgement of some shared understanding. "Tell them, Tommy," Morrison said. "Tell them about the Sullivan deal. Tell them about the protection money. Tell them about the real reason you started feeding false information to everyone." Tommy's grip on his pistol didn't waver, but Vinny caught the subtle change in his expression. "Detective Morrison is trying to deflect attention from his own crimes." "Am I?" Morrison smiled, the expression transforming his face into something predatory. "Or am I trying to give credit where credit is due? You've been planning this moment for months, haven't you, Tommy? The great revelation where everyone's secrets come out in the open, where you emerge as the mastermind who's been protecting Vincent's interests while positioning yourself to take over his organization." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and Vinny felt the ground shifting beneath his feet once again. He'd come tonight expecting to learn about Bradley's betrayal, only to discover that Tommy had been running a complex operation involving federal agents and police corruption. Now Morrison was suggesting that even that revelation was part of a larger deception. "Tommy," Vinny said quietly, "is there anything else I should know about?" Tommy met his boss's eyes, and for a moment, the warehouse faded away. 8 years of loyalty, trust, and shared danger passed between them in a single glance. "Yeah, boss," Tommy said finally. "There's one more thing." The single overhead light in the warehouse cast harsh shadows that seemed to writhe and dance as tension filled the space between the 5 men. Tommy's pistol remained trained on Detective Morrison, but Vinny could see the exhaustion in his protégé's eyes, the weight of secrets that had been carried too long in silence. "In the one more thing," Tommy said, his voice steady despite his obvious fatigue, "is that Detective Morrison is absolutely right about one part of his accusation. I have been positioning myself to take over the organization." Vinny felt the words like physical blows, but he kept his expression neutral. In their world, betrayal was as common as breathing, but this cut deeper than he'd expected. "Go on." Tommy shifted his weight, favoring his injured left side. 6 months ago, I received information that there was a contract out on your life. Not from the Irish, not from the Italians, but from inside our own organization. Someone who'd grown tired of your leadership and saw an opportunity to eliminate you while blaming it on our competitors. Agent Hayes stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Marcelli, if you're confessing to conspiracy to commit murder, I'm confessing to conspiracy to prevent murder," Tommy interrupted. The contract came through Mickey Torino." The name hit Vinny like lightning. Mickey, his own cousin, the man he'd trusted with the West Side operations, the one who'd called this morning to report suspicious police activity. Mickey, who'd been positioned outside this very warehouse as backup. "That's impossible," Vinny said. But even as he spoke the words, pieces of a larger puzzle began falling into place. Mickey's recent questions about succession plans, his suggestions that Vinny was getting too old for the business, his offers to take on more responsibility. Tommy nodded grimly. "Mickey's been building support among the crew for months. He convinced 3 of your lieutenants that you'd lost your edge, that the organization needed younger leadership. The plan was to eliminate you during a staged territorial dispute, then consolidate power under his control. Detective Morrison laughed bitterly. And you decided to play savior by taking over the organization yourself. How noble. No, Tommy said quietly. I decided to save Vinny's life by making everyone believe I was the threat they needed to worry about. Every piece of false information I spread, every deception I orchestrated, every meeting with federal agents, all of it was designed to draw attention away from Mickey's real plans and toward my supposed ambitions. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sound of foghorns on the lake. Vinny studied Tommy's face, searching for signs of deception, but found only exhaustion and something that looked like relief. The injuries, Vinny said. You mean, where did you get them? Mickey's men found me at the Riverside Hotel 2 hours ago. They wanted to know why I'd called this meeting, whether I was planning to eliminate you tonight or just hand you over to the feds. When I wouldn't give them the answers they wanted. Tommy lifted his bandaged left hand, and Vinny could see dark stains seeping through the makeshift wrapping. Agent Hayes was taking notes in a small leather notebook. Mr. Marcelli, are you saying that Michael Torino is planning to assassinate his cousin tonight? I'm saying he was planning to, until I convinced his men that I was already handling the situation. I told them that Detective Morrison and I had arranged for Vincent to be arrested tonight on federal charges, which would clear the way for new leadership without the messiness of murder. Morrison's face had gone pale. You used my name without my permission. I used your corruption against you, Tommy corrected. Mickey's men already knew you were taking money from Sullivan's organization. When I told them you were willing to arrange Vincent's arrest for the right price, it fit their expectations perfectly. Vinny walked to one of the warehouse windows, peering out at the fog-shrouded pier. Somewhere out there, Mickey and his men were waiting for word about the night's success. His own cousin planning his death while pretending loyalty and concern. How many? Vinny asked. 4 men, plus Mickey. They're positioned in a truck about 2 blocks from here, waiting for my signal that the job is done. Agent Hayes closed his notebook. Mr. Torino, I believe we need to coordinate our efforts. If your cousin is planning violence tonight, my cousin is planning treason tonight, Vinny interrupted. In our world, Agent Hayes, that's a capital offense. Tommy holstered his weapon. Vinny, there's something else. Mickey's been in contact with representatives from New York. The commission has been watching our territory, and Mickey promised them that he could deliver Chicago's bootlegging operations under a more cooperative leadership structure. The full scope of the betrayal was staggering. Not only had Mickey been planning Vinny's assassination, but he'd been negotiating the surrender of their independence to the Eastern crime families. Chicago's hard-won autonomy, built through years of violence and careful diplomacy, would disappear under Mickey's leadership. Where's the meeting supposed to take place? Vinny asked. Mickey's expecting me to bring him your body within the hour. If I don't show up, or if I show up without proof of your death, he'll know something went wrong and disappear, probably on the first train to New York. Detective Morrison had been silent during this exchange, but now he stepped forward. Mr. Torino, I may be corrupt, but I'm not stupid. Not. If Mickey Torino takes over your organization and starts answering to New York, it eliminates my income stream and puts me at the mercy of people I can't negotiate with. What are you suggesting? Morrison looked at Agent Hayes, then back at Vinny. I'm suggesting a temporary alliance. Help me eliminate Mickey and his supporters, and I'll make sure tonight's meeting never happened. No federal charges, no arrest warrants, no questions about your operations. Hayes started to object, but Morrison cut him off. Agent Hayes, you came here tonight to gather intelligence about Chicago's criminal networks. Well, you're about to witness the elimination of a significant threat to the existing power structure. From the Bureau's perspective, Vincent Torino is a known quantity. Mickey Torino, connected to New York families, represents unknown variables and potential expansion of Eastern influence into the Midwest. Vinny considered the detective's words. Morrison was right about one thing. Better to deal with familiar enemies than unknown ones. And if Mickey was eliminated along with his supporters, it would send a clear message to anyone else considering betrayal. Tommy, Vinny said finally, can you get word to Mickey that the job is done? Tommy nodded. I can call from the office phone. Tell him that Morrison double-crossed us, that you're dead but the detective is demanding more money to cover up the federal involvement. That should bring him running, Morrison agreed. Mickey will want to eliminate any witnesses who could connect him to your death. Agent Hayes looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Gentlemen, I need to remind you that I'm a federal officer. I cannot be party to planning violent crimes. Then you should leave, Vinny said simply. Walk out that door and forget this meeting ever happened. In the morning, you'll find that several dangerous criminals have eliminated each other, making Chicago a safer place for law-abiding citizens. Hayes considered this for a long moment, then closed his notebook and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Mr. Torino, I never met you tonight. Detective Morrison, I expect a full report on the resolution of this case. As the federal agent walked toward the warehouse exit, his footsteps echoing off the concrete floor, Vinny turned to study the three men who remained. Councilman Bradley looked terrified. Detective Morrison appeared calculating, and Tommy seemed relieved that his long deception was finally coming to an end. Robert, Vinny said to Bradley, you've been playing multiple sides in this game. Tonight, you choose one side permanently. Bradley nodded frantically. Whatever you need, Vincent. I just want to survive this. Tommy, make the call. Detective, I hope you're as good with that service weapon as you are at taking bribes. The next 20 minutes unfolded with the precision of a well-rehearsed play. Tommy limped to the warehouse office and placed the call to Mickey, his voice carrying just the right mixture of exhaustion and urgency. He reported that Vinny was dead. Morrison was demanding additional payment for his silence, and they needed to meet immediately to resolve the situation before dawn brought unwanted attention. Mickey's voice carried clearly through the telephone receiver, filled with satisfaction and barely concealed excitement. You did good, Tommy boy, real good. We'll be there in 10 minutes with the boys. Make sure Morrison understands that cooperation is more profitable than greed. When Tommy hung up the phone, his hand was shaking, not from fear, but from the emotional weight of betraying someone he'd grown up with. Someone who'd been like family before ambition and outside influence corrupted him. He's coming, Tommy announced to the group. 4 men, plus Mickey. They'll approach from the north entrance. Detective Morrison checked his service revolver, ensuring it was fully loaded. Mr. Torino, I want to be clear about something. Once this starts, there's no going back. Mickey and his men won't surrender quietly, and we can't leave witnesses who might testify about tonight's events. Vinny nodded grimly. In their world, half measures were more dangerous than complete solutions. Councilman Bradley, you'll wait in the office until this is finished. Lock the door and don't come out until someone you trust tells you it's safe. Bradley hurried toward the office area, his relief at being excluded from the violence evident in every step. He understood that survival sometimes meant avoiding knowledge as much as acquiring it. The warehouse grew quiet as they took their positions. Morrison crouched behind a stack of shipping crates near the main entrance, his police training evident in how he chose cover that provided multiple escape routes. Tommy, despite his injuries, climbed to a position on the loading dock where he could observe the approaches while remaining hidden from direct view. Vinny positioned himself in the center of the warehouse floor, standing in the pool of light beneath the overhead lamp. He would be the bait, the target that drew Mickey's attention while the others moved into position. The sound of automobile engines grew louder as Mickey's vehicle approached through the fog. Vinny could hear doors slamming, footsteps on gravel, the low murmur of voices as the approaching men discussed their strategy. Mickey had always been cautious, but tonight his caution was mixed with eagerness to claim his prize. Vincent, Mickey's voice called out as the warehouse door creaked open. You in there, cousin? I'm here, Mickey, Vinny replied, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. Come on in, we need to talk. 4 men entered the warehouse, their silhouettes visible against the dim light from outside. Mickey led them, his expensive overcoat and fedora giving him the appearance of a successful businessman rather than a would-be assassin. Behind him came Tony Scalise, Jimmy the Fish Benedetto, and 2 men Vinny didn't recognize. Muscle from outside the organization, probably provided by Mickey's New York contacts. Where's Tommy? Mickey asked, his eyes adjusting to the warehouse lighting as he approached the center of the space. Tommy's taking care of Detective Morrison, Vinny lied smoothly. Had to convince the good detective that dead men don't pay bribes. Mickey laughed, the sound echoing off the warehouse walls. Always thinking that Tommy, I knew he'd come around to seeing things our way eventually. Did you, Mickey? And what way would that be? Mickey's expression grew serious as he stopped about 20 feet from Vinny, his men spreading out in a loose semicircle. The way that recognizes reality. Vincent, you've done good work, built something impressive, but times are changing. The old ways, the small-scale operations, the territorial disputes, that's all finished. The future belongs to organization, coordination, cooperation with the Eastern families. Cooperation, Vinny repeated. Is that what you call selling out Chicago's independence? I call it survival. The commission isn't making suggestions, Vincent. They're making requirements. Chicago can join the new structure voluntarily, or it can be absorbed after its leadership is eliminated. One of the unknown men shifted position slightly, and Vinny caught the glint of metal in his hand. These weren't negotiations. Mickey had come here to end the conversation permanently. And you think you're the man to represent Chicago in this new structure? Mickey's smile was cold. I think I'm the man who's going to be alive tomorrow morning. You, cousin, have become a liability that needs to be resolved. The warehouse exploded into violence with stunning suddenness. Mickey's signal was barely perceptible, a slight nod to his men, but it was enough. The two unknown gunmen raised their weapons toward Vinny, but Detective Morrison's police training proved superior to their hired gun experience. His first shot dropped the man on the left before he could fire, while his second shot wounded the man on the right. Tommy's rifle cracked from the loading dock, and Jimmy, the fish. Benedetto crumpled to the concrete floor. Tony Scalise dove for cover behind a shipping crate, his own weapon barking as he returned fire in Tommy's direction. Mickey, however, was faster than anyone had anticipated. Instead of seeking cover, he charged directly at Vinny, a knife appearing in his hand with deadly precision. The two men grappled in the circle of light, years of family history and shared experiences adding emotional weight to their physical struggle. You always thought you were better than me, Mickey gasped as they fought for control of the knife. Always the boss. Always making the decisions, never trusting anyone else to think for themselves. I trusted you, Vinny replied, managing to grab Mickey's wrist and prevent the knife from finding its target. I trusted you with my life, with the lives of everyone in our organization, and look where that trust got you. The knife blade gleamed in the light as the two men struggled, their feet slipping on the smooth concrete floor. Around them, the gunfight continued as Tony Scalise traded shots with Morrison and Tommy. The wounded gunman was trying to crawl toward the exit, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Vinny felt his strength beginning to fade. Mickey was 15 years younger and desperate with the knowledge that failure meant death. But as they grappled, Vinny remembered lessons learned in dozens of street fights over the years. Knowledge earned through survival in a world where weakness meant elimination. He allowed Mickey to push him backward, apparently losing ground, then used his cousin's momentum against him. A quick step to the side, a twist of his hips, and Mickey stumbled forward off balance. Vinny's right hand found the grip of his .38 Special, and the warehouse lighting reflected off the barrel as he brought it up. Mickey, he said quietly, this is where family loyalty ends. The gunshot was thunderously loud in the enclosed space, seeming to echo forever off the warehouse walls. Mickey's body went rigid for a moment, then collapsed to the concrete floor, the knife clattering away into the shadows. The gunfight around them was ending as well. Tony Scalise had made the mistake of trying to rush Morrison's position and had paid for it with his life. The wounded gunman had finally succumbed to his injuries, and silence was returning to the warehouse. Tommy climbed down from his position on the loading dock, his movements careful as he favored his injured side. Detective Morrison emerged from behind the shipping crates, smoke still rising from the barrel of his service revolver. It's finished, Morrison said, holstering his weapon. Vinny looked down at Mickey's body, feeling an unexpected weight of sadness alongside the satisfaction of survival. They'd grown up together in the same neighborhood, learned the same lessons about loyalty and family, chosen the same dangerous profession, but somewhere along the way, Mickey had forgotten that in their world, betrayal was the one unforgivable sin. Councilman Bradley, Vinny called toward the office area. You can come out now. Bradley emerged cautiously, his face pale as he surveyed the carnage. 4 bodies lay scattered across the warehouse floor, and the air was thick with gun smoke and the metallic scent of blood. What happens now? Bradley asked. Detective Morrison was already reaching for his telephone. Now we clean this up. Officially, Mickey Torino and his associates were killed during a territorial dispute with Irish gangs from the north side. The police responded to reports of gunfire but arrived too late to prevent the violence. Tommy nodded his approval of the cover story. The crew will be told that Mickey betrayed the organization and paid the appropriate price. Anyone who has a problem with that explanation is welcome to find employment elsewhere. Vinny walked to one of the warehouse windows, looking out at the fog that was beginning to lift as dawn approached. Chicago was waking up to a new day, and his organization had survived another challenge to its existence. But the cost had been higher than he'd anticipated, not just in blood, but in the knowledge that trust was an increasingly rare commodity in their world. "Tommy," he said without turning from the window, "from now on, you're my official second in command. No more secret operations, no more information campaigns. We deal with our problems directly." "Understood, boss." "Detective Morrison, I assume this evening's events have clarified your position regarding divided loyalties." Morrison was directing the removal of bodies with the efficiency of someone who'd handled similar situations before. "Perfectly clarified, Mr. Torino. Chicago's interests are my interests." As the sun rose over Lake Michigan, painting the warehouse in shades of gold and amber, Vinny reflected on the lessons learned during the longest night of his career. Deception had its place in their world, but ultimately, survival depended on knowing who could be trusted when the bullets started flying. The game would continue, new challenges would emerge, and other ambitious men would test their resolve. But tonight had proven that experience, loyalty, and the willingness to make hard choices still mattered in a world where weakness invited destruction. 3 weeks after the warehouse incident, Chicago's South Side had settled into a new rhythm. The news of Mickey Torino's death had sent ripples through the city's criminal underworld, but those ripples had quickly been absorbed by the practical necessities of business and survival. Territory that had been contested was now clearly defined. Operations that had been disrupted were running smoothly again, and the delicate balance of power that kept the peace had been restored. Vinny stood in his office above the butcher shop, reviewing ledgers that showed their most profitable month in over a year. The elimination of Mickey's faction had consolidated operations under unified leadership, while the removal of Detective Morrison's divided loyalties had provided them with more reliable intelligence about police activities. Sometimes, he reflected, violence truly was the most efficient solution to complex problems. Tommy entered the office carrying a newspaper and wearing a suit that had been tailored to accommodate the shoulder holster he now wore openly. His promotion to official second in command had changed more than just his title. There was a new confidence in his bearing, the authority of someone who'd proven himself under fire and earned his position through merit rather than mere loyalty. "Morning, boss," Tommy said, settling into the chair across from Vinny's desk. "The Tribune's running a story about the police department's new anti-corruption initiative. Seems like they're planning to clean house in several precincts." Vinny took the newspaper, scanning the article with interest. Detective Morrison's replacement was a Captain William O'Brien, a 20-year veteran with a reputation for honest dealing and professional competence. More importantly, O'Brien was rumored to be more interested in maintaining order than in crusading against bootlegging operations. "Any word from our friends at City Hall?" Vinny asked. "Councilman Bradley sends his regards and assures us that the new police leadership understands the importance of maintaining existing arrangements. He's also mentioned that Agent Hayes has been reassigned to Detroit, so federal interest in our operations has decreased significantly." The morning sun streamed through the office windows, casting sharp shadows across the desk where Vinny conducted the daily business of his organization. Outside, the neighborhood was coming alive with the sounds of commerce and community. Shop owners opening their stores, children walking to school, delivery trucks navigating the narrow streets. It was a world where legitimate business and criminal enterprise coexisted in careful balance. The telephone rang, and Tommy answered it with his usual professional courtesy. After a brief conversation, he hung up and turned to Vinny with news that brought a smile to the older man's face. That was Sophia DeLuca. The federal agents who've been watching her speakeasy have disappeared. Apparently, they've been reassigned to investigate union activities in the steel mills. Vinny nodded with satisfaction. One of the benefits of eliminating Mickey's conspiracy was that it had disrupted the intelligence networks that federal agents had been using to track their operations. New relationships would have to be built, new sources cultivated, new patterns of surveillance established. That process would take months, giving them breathing room to consolidate their gains and plan for the future. A knock on the office door interrupted his thoughts. Tommy's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, but relaxed when Mrs. Patterson, the secretary from downstairs, peered into the room. "Mr. Torino," she said, "there's a gentleman here to see you. Says his name is Patrick Sullivan and that you'll want to hear what he has to offer." Vinny and Tommy exchanged glances. Patrick Sullivan was the Irish gang leader from the North Side, Mickey's supposed ally in the territorial disputes that had provided cover for the real conspiracy. His appearance at their headquarters suggested that the balance of power in Chicago's underworld was still shifting. "Show him up," Vinny said, "but search him first." Sullivan appeared a few minutes later, flanked by Mrs. Patterson, who withdrew as soon as the introductions were made. He was a thin man in his 50s, with the pale complexion and careful movements of someone who'd survived decades in a violent profession through intelligence rather than physical strength. "Mr. Torino," Sullivan said, removing his hat as he entered the office. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. Mr. Sullivan, I hear you've had some interesting conversations with Mickey recently." Sullivan's smile was rueful, had being the operative phrase. "Mickey's death has left me in an awkward position, you understand. I was led to believe that territorial changes were imminent, that new leadership would be more amenable to cooperative arrangements. And now you've discovered that reports of my demise were greatly exaggerated." "Indeed. Which brings me to the purpose of my visit." Sullivan reached into his jacket slowly, producing an envelope that he placed on Vinny's desk. "Inside, you'll find documentation of every conversation I had with Mickey, every agreement we discussed, every plan we considered. I believe you'll find the information illuminating." Tommy leaned forward to examine the envelope, but didn't touch it. "Why would you give us this?" "Because," Sullivan said, "I've been in this business long enough to recognize when I've backed the wrong horse. Mickey promised me expansion opportunities and protection from federal investigation. Instead, his plans resulted in increased police attention and the elimination of several useful political connections." Vinny opened the envelope, finding detailed notes written in Sullivan's precise handwriting. The documents revealed the extent of Mickey's ambitions, not just the takeover of Vinny's organization, but plans to eliminate several other independent operators and consolidate Chicago's entire bootlegging trade under the supervision of New York families. "Mickey was more ambitious than I realized," Vinny said after reviewing the documents. "He was also more naive than I realized," Sullivan replied. "The Eastern families weren't offering partnership. They were offering temporary management positions in exchange for total surrender of independence. Once Mickey had eliminated local leadership and consolidated operations, he would have been replaced by someone more directly connected to commission interests." The implications were sobering. Mickey's betrayal hadn't just threatened Vinny's life and organization, it had threatened Chicago's autonomy in criminal matters. The city's bootlegging trade, built through years of violence and negotiation, would have become a subsidiary of Eastern operations. "What do you want in return for this information?" Tommy asked. Sullivan's answer was immediate. "I want a guarantee that territorial boundaries established before Mickey's conspiracy will be respected going forward. I want assurance that my organization won't face retaliation for its association with his plans. And I want to discuss possibilities for future cooperation between our operations." Vinny considered the proposal. Sullivan's organization controlled significant territory on the North Side, including several profitable speakeasies and an established distribution network for imported liquor. An alliance would strengthen both operations while presenting a united front against future threats from outside the city. "Cooperation is possible," Vinny said finally. "But it requires trust, and trust must be earned through consistent performance over time." "I understand completely." As a gesture of good faith, I should mention that Mickey had scheduled a meeting with representatives from Detroit next week. The purpose was to discuss coordination between Chicago and Michigan operations under the new leadership structure. Obviously, that meeting will not take place as planned. Tommy made notes in his leather-bound book. "Do you know who these Detroit representatives were supposed to be?" Sullivan provided names and contact information, intelligence that would help them understand the broader scope of the conspiracy that Mickey had been part of. The elimination of Mickey and his supporters had disrupted more than just a local power struggle. It had derailed a regional reorganization that would have affected criminal operations throughout the Midwest. After Sullivan left, promising to maintain communication through established channels, Vinny walked to his window overlooking the busy street below. The morning had grown warmer, and people were beginning to shed their heavy coats as they went about their daily business. Children played in the street between passing automobiles, their laughter rising above the urban din. "Tommy," he said without turning from the window, "what did you learn from this whole experience?" Tommy considered the question carefully. "I learned that deception is a valuable tool, but it's also dangerous. The more complex your lies become, the more likely you are to lose track of the truth. I nearly lost sight of who I was supposed to be protecting, and what else. I learned that loyalty isn't just about following orders or keeping secrets. Real loyalty sometimes means making decisions that your boss can't make himself, even when those decisions involve risk." Vinny nodded approvingly. "One more lesson, Tommy. In our business, survival depends on knowing when to trust your instincts and when to question them. You suspected Mickey before you had proof, but you also suspected me of being naive about the threats we faced. I was wrong about that part. Were you? Or were you right to be concerned about an old man who might be losing his edge?" Vinny turned from the window to face his protege. "The truth is, Tommy, this organization survived Mickey's conspiracy because you were willing to act on suspicions that I wouldn't have taken seriously. My experience gave me the knowledge to handle the crisis once it was exposed, but your instincts identified the crisis before it became fatal." The office fell quiet as both men contemplated the lessons learned from their recent ordeal. Outside, Chicago continued its daily rhythm, unaware that several criminal organizations had been eliminated, reorganized, or consolidated during the past month. The city's vast appetite for illegal liquor would be satisfied by new arrangements, new alliances, and new leadership structures that had emerged from violence and negotiation. The telephone rang again, and Tommy answered with his usual efficiency. After a brief conversation, he hung up and turned to Vinny with a smile. "That was Captain O'Brien. He wants to schedule a meeting to discuss mutual interests and areas of cooperation. Seems like the new police leadership is ready to establish working relationships with community business leaders. Schedule it for next week," Vinny said. "And Tommy, this time, we'll both know exactly what we're walking into." As the afternoon sun climbed higher over Chicago's south side, Vinny Torino settled back into the comfortable routine of running his organization. The ledgers showed continued profitability. The telephone brought reports of successful operations, and the city outside his window hummed with the energy of commerce and ambition. The game would continue, new challenges would emerge, and other ambitious men would test their resolve. But for now, in this moment, his organization was secure. His leadership was unquestioned, and his right-hand man had proven that loyalty and intelligence could triumph over betrayal and deception. In Chicago's underworld, that counted as a happy ending. The morning mist had cleared completely, revealing a city full of possibilities and dangers in equal measure. Somewhere in those streets, new conspiracies were being born, new alliances were being forged, and new betrayals were being planned. But Vincent Torino and Tommy Marcelli would face those challenges together, armed with hard-won wisdom about the price of trust and the value of loyalty, in a world where both commodities were always in short supply. The deceiver's gambit had played out to its conclusion, leaving behind lessons that would serve them well in the battles yet to come.